I'm very pleased today to be joined by my guest, Richard Luong. Richard Luong is the Director of Institutional Advancement at Rising for Justice. Hi, Richard. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing great. Dr. Wang, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Would you like to share a little bit about yourself with us?
Oh, my pleasure. Currently, as you said, I'm the Director of Institutional Advancement at Rising for Justice. Our mission is to leverage the collective forces of students and experienced advocates and lawyers to achieve justice for everyone in the District of Columbia. Every year, we directly represent individuals, including those who are facing housing equity issues, who can't afford counsel. We train law students and social work students annually in clinical education programs to represent clients alongside our staff attorneys. And we also provide other legal services such as expungement, civil protection order representation, and impact litigation representation. I'm currently a member of our executive management team. I oversee our development, communications and marketing programs, including our grant and foundation relationships. That's currently where I'm at right now.
That's amazing. So tell us a little bit about how if, for example, a person or employee having ran into any legal matters and then don't have any means of looking out for justice, would that be an ideal candidate for you guys, or can they contact you guys?
Yes, no, absolutely. So something that's really special about our organization is we have staff offices directly in the courts in DC. Of course, that's a little bit different right now because of the pandemic, and with the way courts are operating, everything is done virtually. Mm-hmm. It's actually really fascinating. Everything's done in WebEx, and you can observe a virtual courtroom in WebEx right now too, rather than going into the physical courthouse.
Wow.
But we're proud because we staff somebody at housing court every single hour the housing court is open. Mm-hmm. And pretty much in a nutshell, what our lawyers do is they are there for anyone who shows up at housing court who doesn't have a lawyer. Mm-hmm. They do consultations with these clients, evaluate what their situation is, mm-hmm. And in some cases give same-day legal representation to people who need it. And this is really critical because oftentimes their housing is on the line. They've been served with a notice of eviction. Mm-hmm. They're showing up without a lawyer, and they don't understand what legal remedies they have. They don't understand what actions they could possibly be also kind of like countering mm-hmm. the landlord with.
Right.
And we can achieve outcomes for them, such as proactively reducing their rent, having their rent reduced to zero, mm-hmm. or negotiating with the landlord to come up with terms to keep them in their homes. I think that's kind of the number one end goal that we're hoping for in all these processes is we want to keep people in their homes.
Yeah.
And we want to give them the information and resources to understand what it means to live in a home that is fit for habitation. So mm-hmm. oftentimes people who come to us are living in conditions where not only is it, should they not be evicted, the landlord should be doing things to fix their home because it's not habitable. Mm-hmm. So our team does an awesome job of working with clients to make sure that they understand all of their rights, and so that they can stay in their houses. That's one big piece of what we do, and that's called our tenant justice program. People seek justice in other ways too, and they come to us. So one of our other signature programs is called our expungement program. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with expungement at all, or I could explain
Sure,
it a little
please. Please go ahead.
So with expungement, there's thousands of people in Washington, D.C. with a criminal record.
Okay.
And a criminal record can be a really substantial burden that really stands in the way of their efforts to thrive. And I think our work is kind of like rooted in this concept of, these folks have often, they serve their time, they're out now, and they deserve to, be able to rebuild their lives and thrive. A criminal record can pose barriers to them in a lot of different ways,
right?
From obtaining housing or financial aid or public benefits,
jobs,
or in quality work, most importantly. So we have an expungement program that provides legal counsel without charge to help people who have criminal records kind of like navigate the really complicated legal process of clearing their records. So we are one of the few places in Washington, D.C., and I would venture one of a handful of places that offers free attorney representation to help people to seal their criminal records and put their past behind them. And we train attorneys through this program to volunteer to help people to do that too. So not only are our staff attorneys doing that, we're also training anyone who wants to work pro bono and like just volunteer some of their time to help people in this process to be able to do that. And the beauty of things now is that can be done really anywhere. It can be done virtually. So you don't need to be a lawyer in Washington, D.C. to volunteer in our expungement program. You can be anywhere and help people kind of like make a big step in their lives to be able to thrive again.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and that's awesome to hear. So I'll call out to all the lawyers out there, all over the world, that are looking forward to make a difference, in other people's lives, and then to help, and they're looking for to contribute their time and efforts to help others make a difference in their lives. It's just like you said, those people can make mistakes in their lives, and then their criminal records shouldn't be the single thing that hinder them from getting a better life exactly. So that's really great to know that there are resources like Rising for Justice out there for citizens and people who are in need of those help and assistance. And it's so amazing to hear that Rising for Justice also help train basically junior lawyers, right, or just legal consultants to help the people in need.
Yeah, so we are. That's another unique thing about our organization is we started out as law school clinics. So when we began, we were a clinical program for law students for a majority of all of the law schools in Washington, D.C. to gain practical skills to be a lawyer. So going through law school, oftentimes you're taught about the law, but you're not necessarily taught about how to be a lawyer. You're taught about what the laws mean, but you don't get the experience of working with clients. You don't get the experience of talking in front of a judge and making your arguments. So when Rising for Justice started out, we were only a legal clinic. So we work with students from the law schools, specifically third-year law school students, to develop those practical and fundamental lawyering skills, and provide assistance and counsel clients. And it's really amazing. I mean, these students are incredible. They do this work under the supervision of one of our attorneys, but they do all of the work. They're working with the clients. They're drafting the documents for the clients. They're presenting the case to judges for the clients. And it's a really unique opportunity for them to practice law, and to represent people before they're even out of law school. And I think it's very motivating for them, and it really helps like shape their careers too. We've heard from so many countless individuals who have gone through the program, just telling us, it opened their eyes to kind of like what it means to work in public interest and in public service, and gave them experience, they really wouldn't have otherwise in law school. Instead of just having their head in a book, they get to get really meaningful experience before they start their career.
And then getting the firsthand insight on what does it mean to be, a lawyer, right? That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm going to turn to the next page, and I'm also very interested in your journey, your experience. So I'm just curious, what does your last name mean?
My last name. So
if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, no, I don't mind at all. My last name is Luong, and it means bamboo. So Luong, I also know has Chinese roots. I am full Vietnamese. My parents trace their heritage back Vietnamese as far as they can, but I do know that it is rooted in Chinese.
That's very interesting. So would you like to share a little bit about your parents' journey?
Sure. So I think I'd start off by saying my journey is very much so shaped by, in my career and my trajectory in life is very much so shaped by my parents' experiences. I think sometimes when we talk about, like how we identify, we can identify as male or, cisgender, and we have our pronouns, but one way I identify myself is being the son of refugees. I feel like that's just so shaped my experiences, and who I am. So my parents were born in Thi Hoa, Vietnam. They're both born in 1957, and during their young adulthood, they had to live through the Vietnam War. And my mom's family fled Vietnam in different groups, in like small segments. And to give you another picture of both of their families, they both come from humongous families. So they both have 8 or 9 siblings apiece. Very, very big families. So my mother's mother, my grandma on my mom's side, she left Vietnam with some of my mom's siblings very soon after the Vietnam War, I believe 1976 when they left. And they initially settled in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My mom successfully left Vietnam in 1980, several years later. And it wasn't for a lack of trying. She had to try 10 times until she was successful in leaving Vietnam.
Wow.
And although my parents grew up in the same town, they weren't together when they left Vietnam. but they happened to be on the same boat together when they left Vietnam.
Okay.
And they fell in love with each other through that journey of leaving Vietnam together. So they found themselves in a refugee camp in the Philippines.
Yeah.
They were there for some time, a little over a year before being able to come to America. And I mentioned this to you before, but having learned that fact that it took my mom 10 times until she was successful, made me realize, if she was successful the first time, I probably wouldn't be here because she wouldn't have left with my dad. They wouldn't have fallen in love in the Philippines. And I wouldn't, chances are they probably would have resettled in different places.
Yeah.
And I may not necessarily, have had the chance to come to be. So it's kind of a wild thing to think about is, one, how difficult it was to flee the country, but two, if it was any easier, I wouldn't be alive. They resettled in Virginia. At that point, my mom's family had put their roots down in Virginia.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Fairfax County. I lived in Fairfax and Berkeley, Springfield.
Yeah.
Growing up. And kind of forgetting what the original question was.
So do you want to basically actively involved in social justice since you were a young kid, or is it something that you realized you want to do when you became an adult?
It was something I knew I wanted to do ever since I was a kid.
Okay.
I was a really strange child who listened to Democracy Now! When they were in 7th grade. And I was obsessed with Amy Goodman and listening to NPR. And I read everything I could. I was super, super fascinated by social justice at a really young age. And I knew that I always wanted my trajectory to be in the public service sphere.
Yep.
I think initially my interest was when I was very young, where I got a little bit wiser, my interest was in politics.
Yes.
I was really enthralled by politics, loved reading about politics, loved debating politics. By the time I left college, though, I knew that wasn't a space I necessarily wanted to get into, but I wanted to serve people. And that's what drove me to go to law school. And during my time in law school, my studies definitely focused on public interest and public service law. And upon graduating law school, I worked in environmental litigation for several years. And in that work, I represented citizen groups who were adversely affected by natural gas drilling in Pennsylvania and New York. I did that for about 3 years.
Yeah.
Following law school, and doing that really, it was a dream of mine, and it was a dream fulfilled, but also it was very difficult and taxing work. And what I mean by that is when you're taking forward motions and lawsuits against very large natural gas drilling and oil companies, you quickly understand that the chances of you winning are like almost zero. The laws are written in their favor on a national scope, on a state scope, and then on the local level, they get into the communities, and what from my experience was they also infiltrate local zoning commissions and local city councils to rezone spaces to allow drilling. And meanwhile, they're also cutting deals with people to lease their land to drill on. And 3 years was about all I could give to that, because it was just so heartbreaking to see what they were doing to these communities. And not necessarily like always be getting the results I wanted to get. We'd be happy to get injunctions to stop drilling sometimes, but ultimately what I learned a lot through that process was a big, thing that was going to drive change was making more people educated about what's going on, and especially lawmakers educated about what's going on, and changing the way that the laws are written. And fortunate for me, there's lots of good, amazing people continuing the good fight, and I felt, I didn't feel any sort of way about, making a career transition at that point, but there's so many amazing people who continue to fight for environmental justice when it comes to natural gas drilling and otherwise, all over the country and all over the world. It's very truly a global issue, and it's an issue that really impacts minorities and people of color more than others. These are the communities that are most often adversely impacted and whose voices aren't lifted enough during these processes.
Exactly. Not to mention, the indigenous people, right? Their land. Yeah. So.
Oh yeah. Number one.
Right. Exactly.
First, but yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. I understand, and then appreciate that you're sharing your environmental litigation journey, and how that is alarming and enlightening to see that it is important to make everybody, regardless of whether they have a law degree or not, just a local, local, regional, and a national level, to make more people educated about this issue and how serious it's gotten, especially when the local laws or even national laws are sort of written for the big companies' favor. That's really disheartening to see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's such a collective effort, and no piece is any more important than another. Somebody who is participating in a march or writing letters to their congressperson is doing just as impactful work as somebody who's litigating.
Exactly. It's definitely collective efforts of all, that we all fight for the change, that it's all for a better future for everybody, right? Yeah, indeed. Right. So I want to draw back a little bit, when you shared about your parents' journey, and then because based on our previous conversations, you mentioned that you also contributing your efforts for a podcast that's called Vietnamese Boat People. Would you like to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So in my spare time, I work with a group called Vietnamese Boat People. I found them through initially what was a podcast that was started by Tracy Nguyen Mang. And through this podcast, she was starting off by just simply interviewing her family. She was a refugee herself, but she fled Vietnam when she was just a very, very small child. So she doesn't remember, a ton about that process. She does remember some. But she wanted to make sure, I feel like she was getting to that age where she just wanted to make sure she was preserving her family's legacy in some way. And that resonated with a lot of people, including myself, when I found it. And because it was something that I always wanted to do, was to sit down with my family and really have the same types of conversations she was having with hers, with mine. So from there, we just became fast friends and great partners, and worked to expand the organization. So now the organization's mission is to preserve and tell stories of the Vietnamese diaspora, initially through podcasts, like I said before, and now through other cultural and humanities-based programs. So obviously, like, the mission is really near and dear to my heart, with both of my parents being Vietnamese refugees and myself being a first generation who has kind of like longed to want to piece their story together, and those of other family members as well. And during my time at Vietnamese Boat People, what I've really tried my best to do is work with the team to expand our work beyond the scope of a podcast. Right, because I think there's so many other ways we can be impactful, and I'm really thankful to Tracy to always being supportive and of my vision and providing her own vision and kind of like growing and expanding the organization. And my role there right now is the growth and development lead, and I'm also the project director for what's called our Vietnamese diaspora story mapping project. And that story mapping project is funded by New Jersey Council of the Humanities. And right now we're in our second grant with them to develop a story mapping platform. So what the platform does is it gives people a digital crowdsourced map of journeys from Vietnam. So the map will be populated with our podcast episodes, but will also give people, anyone, whether they're in the United States or otherwise, the ability to plot out their journey or their family's journey on the map. And the map will display anyone's journey who has entered it into the map, so that you kind of get to see this really powerful vision of all of these journeys all in one place. So you can plot out where you were born in Vietnam, where you departed Vietnam from, where you may have stopped and lived in a refugee camp temporarily, and then where you resettled now, whether that's in the States or otherwise. We're working with a web developer right now to build out that platform. It's really exciting because I think we're only a couple of months away from beta testing the platform, and then hopefully giving more general public access to the platform. And our big vision is the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon is coming up in 4 years. And we'd like to source, ambitiously, we'd like to source 50,000 stories on the map by the 50th anniversary. We really think we will be able to do it. Let me think. Another program we're working on through these grants that we completed was something called our conversation kit. So something I mentioned before was I had never really sat down with my family and had a really formal conversation about what their journey was like. And I feel like for a lot of Vietnamese folks who are first generation like me, a theme that I saw come up a lot was they didn't know how to talk to their families about what their families went through. And one, because they weren't comfortable doing it. Two, because they sensed that maybe their parents weren't comfortable doing it. Or three, they didn't know the right questions to ask. So I thought it was really important to tackle those three issues, right? So what we ended up developing was a kit that you can find on the website now. You can print it out. It has questions that you can ask. It gives you context on what the journey was like for many Vietnamese refugees,
Mhm.
so that you can have a baseline understanding going into a conversation of what issues and experiences people had through that journey.
Yeah.
And third, it gives you some tips on creating the right environment to be able to do it, and how to record and document
Mhm.
those conversations properly.
Yeah.
And to me, that was just such an important thing to do because one, through my own experiences, knowing how difficult it is to have those conversations and not knowing where to start. And two, hearing that so much from other first generation Vietnamese, including people like my cousins,
Yeah.
who, when they found out I was doing it, they reached out to me and they were like, "Oh my God, I've never talked to my parents about this because I never knew where to start."
Mm.
But now, I feel like I have some tools that I can use, and I feel more comfortable doing it.
Mhm.
And I think something that people will find is that if you're very intentional and you're very patient, you will learn. You will learn the stories.
Mhm.
Your parents will dig deeper. But it just may take time.
Yeah.
But knowing the right questions to ask is really important. And kind of like just getting over that hump of making both sides be vulnerable and uncomfortable is kind of like the first step. And then
Yeah.
good things happen after people accept being vulnerable and accept the fact that they are going to be a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's especially very important to have our, various stories heard, right? Various experiences heard. So what are the, for example, sample questions inside the conversation kit that you recommend people to get started? And I'm sure they can download the resources from the website that you're going to share later.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely share it with you. I think part of this process, and I would say it's not so much a question,
Mhm.
but more so like a mindset,
Right.
is I think people who are in my position need to explain very clearly how much it means to them to learn their parents' story. Because I've heard sometimes when somebody's asking for these stories, or they express like, "This means a lot to me to learn your story,"
Mhm.
that sometimes a parent will react and say, "Oh, I didn't know. I
Right.
didn't know you wanted to know this. I didn't know it meant so much to you." I just kind of like wanted to, shield you from, these bad experiences and focus on, letting you live your life and be happy
Mhm.
and take advantage of, the opportunities that exist for you.
Right.
Um, and, for a lot of, immigrant parents in general, and it's not just Vietnamese parents at all, I feel like this is probably a theme that exists for a lot of different immigrant families, no matter what, ethnicity or nationality you are,
Yeah.
is that parents don't necessarily like, uh, they think that there's some kind of like protection going on to not tell these stories,
Mhm.
because they want the child to be more focused on kind of like, I don't want to use the word assimilating, but
Their own
like,
development.
yeah, you want to let your child develop. You want your child to not be so aware of how they're different
Just
from
be
others.
American. Yeah.
Yeah, and just, do your thing and be successful, and not worry about what we had to go through.
Yeah.
Even though that's really important things to know. So I guess to answer your question, like, I think the most important thing, one first, is like the mindset, and expressing that to whoever you're trying to get that information from, that it means something to you.
Mhm.
Um, and that was the most effective thing with my family. Because I feel like I kind of ask questions here and there, like growing up, and usually I get shot down pretty quick, or they'd be really vague. They'd be like, "Oh yeah, it was hard, but now we're here, and you don't have to worry about it," or something like that. You know. But when I got older, you know, I express myself and say, you know, this means a lot to me. I really want to know because, you know, your experiences matter to me, and learning about you is really important to me. And if you put it that way, I think you'll find that they will become more receptive.
I resonate so much with what your parents have said because being an immigrant myself, though currently a citizen, I did go through that immigration experience. The sole goal of my pursuing the American dream is for, is pursuing a better life, not only for myself, but also for the future generation as well. And regardless of the hardships, we have to go through to be able to sort of land here in the first place, with a student visa and go through, the intensive studies and regardless and all that. But I totally resonate with though I can imagine the experiences of, traveling the abroad and all that journey, have to settling in a place and then resettlement and all that during the wartime. So, but I really believe that having our stories heard, having the lived experiences heard is not only empowering for people in general, but also, for our younger generations as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, to retrace their roots, right? It's part of them, part of their history and heritage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what stands out to me a lot is I like this idea of resilience. So refugee and immigrant families have to be so incredibly resilient. They have to make great sacrifices during, the totality of their journeys. In the process of leaving your country, you're left with nothing in terms of possessions, but you're also leaving big parts of your identity and what makes you who you are in the process. So, like for example, my grandma was a businesswoman. She owned a movie theater when she was in Vietnam. But after she fled Vietnam, she could only be a dishwasher or, work in a kitchen. I had uncles who, had medical degrees and left and came to America, and they had to work night shifts in a convenience store. So knowing that they had to start with nothing, but they also had to leave behind, really things that identified or, things about their identity that made them who they were is really amazing. It just speaks to that kind of theme of resilience where it's, I think knowing that about my family, it really changes your perspective on how you interact with people in day-to-day life. Like, anytime I do go to a convenience store, I think about my dad, about how my dad had to work in one, during the night shift.
Yeah.
And, or anyone you kind of like cross paths with in your life, it's like they're at a certain point now, but that might not have always been their life. And it's not, it may not continue to be their life. It can change dramatically. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, your experience, your journey, and your parents' journey, and especially highlighting, Rising for Justice as well as Vietnamese boat people, the organization. And I hope, the resources are helpful for our audience. And if anybody who's interested in connecting with you, how can they reach out to you?
Well, they can reach out to me through LinkedIn. I'm sure I can just send my profile over.
Sure.
People can connect there. And I guess through other social media channels too, if you just search my name, and look for the Asian guy who happens to have a beard. You'll find me. There's not many.
Your signature.
There's several. There's several Richard Luongs in the world, but there's only one that I've seen that that looks like me. So
Okay.
it makes it easier to find me.
So is it I mean, obviously that's your preference, and so you just like beard, I guess.
Yeah, no, this is you know what, I never grew one out until I think 3 or 4 years ago. But I feel like I had to represent for all the Asians and grow one because I could. And now I don't think I'm ever going to get rid of it because I don't know, it's another breaking stereotypes thing, right?
I mean, you look fabulous in it.
Thanks. Yeah, no, but there's just not many Asian people who do it. So I feel almost like an obligation to continue wearing it. Just because not many people can.
Oh, that's so interesting. I mean, I couldn't, but hey, that's your style, keep it up, and then Richard, thank you so much again for sharing those inspiring stories and lived experiences. I'm sure it's very beneficial for everybody to know, and to know that we Asians, right? The umbrella word Asians represents, so many different cultures, stories, lived experiences, languages, and then stay tuned for Rise Up podcast for our next guests and their stories. And thank you so much, Richard, for sharing.
Yeah, and no, thank you so much for having me, and thanks so much for saying that last thing you said too. I think oftentimes people say Asian Americans, and it's kind of with this connotation that we're a single monolith, but Asian Americans trace their heritage to so many different parts of the world.
Exactly.
And there are so many different ethnicities that Asian Americans fall under. And I really commend you for doing this podcast, but also as I could see by just who you've had as guests so far, like exploring all the many different sides of what represents Asian Americans.
Thank you so much for your support. Much appreciated. I look forward to continue our conversation, maybe perhaps in the future, in the next episode.
Oh yeah, definitely. Thanks, Dr. Wang.
Thank you, Richard. Take care. Talk soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.